Well, I appreciate so much your prayers and support for the ministry there in India. It just dawned on me some months ago that it's 10 years now since we've been involved, but it actually began long before that in December of 2004 when the tsunami, which hammered the southeastern coast of India, took place. You might remember that in terms of Southeast Asia and how those tidal waves decimated a lot of those areas. That's when Brother Paul began to reach out to other brethren and ask if they could help. He contacted me, and it began a long conversation about who are you, and this is who we are, and well, this is our statement of faith. And we discussed the statement of faith for a good 10, 11 months. And then he is the head of the mechanical engineering department of I guess we would call it a technical college there in South India called Karpagnam. And he was here in the US in October of 2005, I think it was. And we met, we talked some more. I said, well, I'll present this to the Foreign Mission Panel. We'll see if there's any interest. And the panel, we recommended that we go and visit and see what was happening there. And so our first visit was in January of 2007, and the rest is history. God opened the doors for a partnership with them because they embraced the statement of faith and began to practice the same things that we do in terms of baptism, communion, and our premillennial position as well. So that it's been a joy. Now, it's already up there. So 2007 was my first trip, and then our written plan called for a trip every 2 years. The reason for that is that before we went in 2007, during that year, 2006, there was a young man at Grace Seminary whose name was Joel Mathai, who was from India. And Joel at that time was a part of a mission organization called Christar, and he was ministering to international students at Texas A&M University in Texas. And Abraham Thomas, who had also been, I think he graduated from Grace Seminary. He's from Kerala in a very southwestern state of India. In fact, I think it's probably on this map here. Abraham Thomas is down here, Kerala. And we asked them, we said, we have this opportunity to go to India and work with this group, formerly Plymouth Brethren group, that has embraced our statement of faith. What advice would you give us? And in fact, in 2007, when we were there, we went to visit Abraham Thomas and talked to him, and Paul got to meet him. And their advice to us was, well, everything that you've done so far is good. The investigations, everything as far as doctrinal statements, but you're also going to need to have accountability. You're going to have to come and visit on a regular basis to make sure everything is going well, and not just for accountability. You want to be an encouragement. You want to have fellowship with them. And so that's what we've done. That's been our practice ever since. And so this trip this year, every other year or every odd numbered year we go. I'm sure Ladine is thinking, yeah, I remember 2011. She went with us that year. Abby Pearson from the Peru, Indiana, Grace Brethren Church, and brother and sister, Jonathan and Grace Steiner, went with Nancy and I this last time. And so when we go, mainly we spend time down here at the city of Coimbatore in the state of Tamil Nadu. If you follow any of the news about India at all, you probably know that 6 states now in India, of the 29 states, 6 of them have passed anti-conversion laws. It is illegal for you to, the law reads something like this: allure, coerce, force somebody to change religions. Well, forget about how it's worded, because the RSS, the Hindu nationalists of India, their objective is to rid India of all Christians. Their goal is to do that by 2023. And they use these so-called anti-conversion laws to stop Christian witness and to try to disassemble the churches that are there. When we were there, and I'll give you an example of that, we went to the village of Satyamangalam, which is up in the mountains. There's tribal groups up in these mountains, up in the mountains away from Coimbatore. If you want to know about that trip, just ask Nancy. She can tell you all about it. And the stop along the way. She said, I think I'm going to lose breakfast, so stop the car now. It's a beautiful area, but when we got up there, this is Brother Paul here. This is one of our drivers, the van drivers that we had. And he told them, he said, park the vans over there, and you guys just wait for us there. And then we walked down this road, meet with the believers. We had to go down, around, and they were back over in that area. And I said to him, why don't they just drive down there? I mean, it's 10 o'clock and it's only 95 degrees, but hey, why don't they just drive down there and let us out? And he said, because they're Hindus. And I said, what's that mean? He said, well, if they drive down there and they see what's going on, there's a good possibility they'll call some of their friends or members of the RSS, and they'll come and try to break up the service. He said, so we're just going to have them stay over there and we're going to go on down. What's interesting to me is we got down into this village. We had met these individuals 2 years prior because they were interested in our fellowship of churches. They wanted to know more about us. They attended the conference, and we had made the first visit in 2015. By this time, 3 of the leaders had been baptized by trained immersion. They were working with the other men there, so we went up to see them. And it's kind of an interesting situation because as we got near, the people of the village came out and welcomed us, and it went like this. Said to Brother Paul, now let me try to understand this. So they came out to welcome us, but the drivers who are Hindus have to stay back up there. He said, right. Well, how come they're so excited about us being here? Well, they like us. These are the people who live here. They think the Christians are fine people. They're integrity. They like us. They're glad you're here. I said, so it's just the Hindu nationalists? He said, basically. So there's this division, obviously. I mean, these people are lost too, but they're not opposed to what the believers there are doing. These are the 3 elders of the church there. Velusamy is the oldest, and he and his family are planting this church in Satyamangalam. And Stephen and Reuben are working together in a couple outlying villages to plant churches there. They're all in the same area, and they work together. I remember in 2015 when we were going up there, there was a gate that we had to go through and a park ranger, and I said, what's this? Oh, we have to get permission to enter this area because it's a national forest, and there are tigers and other wild animals up there. And I said, tigers? I just hoped we didn't see any, and we didn't. So we participated with them in their worship service. That was Sunday, May 7th. It was really a good time. I was really impressed with the testimony time that they had. So many people who shared what the Lord had been doing in their lives. And one of the new converts, I think it's this lady right back here, if I remember right, invited us to her house afterwards, and we went there for some coconut milk, and I don't remember what else we had, but if you've ever had coconut milk or water from a green coconut, boy, I hope you like it, because I sure don't. I mean, I can eat and drink about anything, but that's something I really don't like. But anyhow, it was nice hospitality, and we got to spend time with them and see how the work there is progressing. In India right now, in our fellowship of churches they have planted about 30 churches so far. And they've had ups and downs because they received threats. They're especially up in the state of Odisha, not so much down in Tamil Nadu. But it's a challenge as far as witnessing, and I'll share a little bit more about that when we get to the Brother Peter Sipka. So then we traveled back down. We visited Agape Home. This is one of the orphanages where they care for not only true orphans, but there are a lot of families, either there's one parent family, and so that parent is working, care of the children, and they will send them to Agape Home for an education, because in India, there is no free education. You have to pay for any education that you get. Somebody had asked earlier, before we even started today, how far the orphanages are apart, and they're a good distance apart. Agape Home is just outside the city of Coimbatore, but the other orphanage, Torbe House, is about an 8-hour drive outside the city of Rajapalayam. And so they're not very close. The reason for that is the Rajans live in Coimbatore, and they look over this, but in outside of Rajapalayam, Paravakudi, I think is the name of the town where Torbe House is, Paul's father was caring for orphans there, and after he died, they built this orphanage, and they're continuing the ministry down there. When we were there in May, school was over, and so these were the boys, the orphan boys who remained. Some of the other boys had gone to be with their parents for the summer break. And one of the difficulties that they're facing at the orphanage is government regulations continue to be increased. Maybe if I back this up. They're told, well, you have to have iron gates here, and you have to have security cameras here, and you have to add, and so they continue to make regulations to try to drive them out of business, if I could put it that way. And it's really a nonsensical thing, because one of the men that I talked to in 2011, we were there, he asked me, he said, why do, of all the orphanages in India, probably 90% of them are run and cared for by Christians. Why is that? Is that something that's inborn? I said, no, you have to be reborn. So I had a chance to share the gospel with him. But he brought up a really good point. You have most of the orphanages that are run there in the country are run by Christians, and the government's trying to stop that. But what are they going to do with all those kids? Just have them run around on the street because they don't have money to go to school? It just doesn't make any sense. One of the guys in their parliament, they have a parliamentary, a UK kind of government, bill to get rid of all the Christian orphanages, and told everybody that we as the government will take care of these children. I'm sure the government could do a better job. No. I think here in America, we know that if the government gets involved, it's not going to be better. If you've never seen the Prager video on why the government will never succeed at healthcare, you should watch it. But so these were the boys that were there when we arrived. The church at Orville had gathered a lot of educational supplies, pencils, colored pencils, sharpeners, erasers, different things that they needed for school, and we took those along. The Peru Grace Brethren Church had made some quilts and sent them along. Abby was the one who kind of help when we handed these out. I didn't know how, it's Coimbatore is a little higher, so it's not quite as hot there. It was probably only about 90, 95. And he's wrapping himself in this quilt, even though it's so hot, because he really likes it. He likes that quilt. So after we were there at the orphanage, then what happens each time we go every 2 years, we have a conference where we gather all the church planters together. For a number of years, we've done that in Coimbatore, and everybody comes to the same place. Well, we had so many people in 2015 that we didn't really have, it was pretty packed. I mean, we were tight. But the thing that was more difficult than that was you have 2 different languages, because every state speaks a different language. Hindi is supposed to be the national language, but hardly anybody uses it. They use English instead. But their English, it's like the interpreters say to me, it's really hard to understand your English. And I said, that's because I don't speak like Indian, from UK. It's just kind of difficult. And so we decided it would be better to have 2 conferences, so the guys who are up in the north don't have to travel the 36-hour train ride to come all the way down. It would be easier to take the 4 or 5 of us up there and maybe a couple hours from where they live and meet there. And so that's what we did. So we had a conference, the first conference in Coimbatore. I missed a slide here somewhere. There we go. So we had a conference in Coimbatore with the church planters there. Do you notice anything about that sign? I said to Brother Paul, we're not the GCBCI. And he just started to laugh and said, well, you can tell that non-English speakers made that sign. And here's a little clip from our conference. We had a lot of good
Amen. Those who are from your hands, please raise your hands. Hallelujah. Amen.
One of the interesting things about that conference is when it was over, it was 3 days, and the topics for these conferences this year was the home, the family. What does the Bible say about husbands and wives and children? And we went over that. Brother Paul said to me, he said, after we left, people stayed around there and continued to fellowship and sing on their own, and they said, boy, I wish this would go on another 3 or 4 or 5 days. It's been so great, such great fellowship and love and sharing. That was very impressive to me that they did that. We also had communion there with the believers. You can probably recognize Nancy in the chair. That's probably not Sarah, is it? Washing your feet. Okay. And then we also had a baptismal service. Well, these are the people that were there at the conference. Probably you won't be able to find me in the crowd there, but most of the people who were there. And then the people who were baptized were these people. There's one guy, he's not in the picture. He had to go to work. He had to leave early and go to work, so he missed the picture. But these were the new believers. And we had a baptismal service for them. I'm not near as fast as Brian Maley. I think it was in 2015 when we were there, Pastor Les Van Osdale said to me, "Why are you baptizing them? Why don't they baptize them?" I said, that's a good question. Next time I go back, I'm going to ask. And so at this baptism, I said to Brother Paul, "How come I'm baptizing them and you're not?" He said, "We're honoring you. We're bringing the new converts to you and have you baptize them." I said, "So your thinking is it's an honor to me to do this?" He said, "Yeah. Don't you think so?" I said, "Well, I'll tell Pastor Les that." You'll see at the end of the presentation today that Brother Joseph on October 8th baptized a couple who had come to Christ. He lives in a state where the anti-conversion law exists. I mean, if they went to his house and burned it and killed him and said, "Well, you violated the law," that's possible. But you know what those men say? We must obey God rather than men. And then he sent me some more pictures. He said, "By the way, there are 2 more people who got saved. I baptized them. Here are the pictures." And then I got an email from Brother Paul before I came here, and he said, "On October 29th, we're going to have a baptismal service in Coimbatore and baptize 10. So praise the Lord for the good things that are happening. By the way, as we go through this, if you have a question, feel free to ask while we're there. So if you're like me, you're thinking, "I sure hope I don't forget my question."
Was it at this conference that the men from Punjab came down?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Well, can I do that when we get to Odisha? Because they didn't come down to this conference.
Oh, okay. All right.
They met us in Vishakhapatnam.
Okay.
So down at Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu, these are the church planners there. You already saw a picture of him from South Mangalam, Reuben and Belusami and Stephen, but there's also Samuel and Albert. They're planning a church in a suburb of Coimbatore. Brother David, if you didn't see the, I don't remember what year it was. It might have been 2015. We put together a DVD about how that church was planted. If you didn't see that, it's available if you'd like to see it, where Brother David is. And then he also is involved with the center. He also teaches at the orphanage, and he's also helping with the outreach at Kandia Perry. He is like the Energizer Bunny. Brother Munasamy is way out on the east side of Tamil Nadu. He's in actually a French territory called Pondicherry, where there's a church there. And then Brother Paul here, and he works with P.K. Moses. They both teach at the same school that I mentioned. And Brother Paul and his family, his boys have really grown over the last 10 years. I put Dr. Gilbert up here because Gilbert is now a medical doctor working at a hospital. Their plan, he and his dad's plan, is to build a hospital and have him run it. When we were at the conference in Coimbatore, we would take a break for lunch, and they had a cafeteria set up, and we would go into the cafeteria and get our lunch. And I really don't like this, but they consider us special guests, so we had to sit in a special place and bring us special food, and we ate. Anyhow, after lunch one day, I was just sitting there, and I watched this boy. His name was Yasin, who he was helping the younger boys get their stuff and making sure they had what they needed. And when they were all done, he went and got his lunch and went over in the corner. And before he ate it, I watched him pray. And I thought, well, that's really good. I mean, nobody's making him pray. He's over there by himself. And so afterwards, I said to Brother Paul, I was so impressed by Yasin, because he's over there and he's praying by himself. And Paul says, well, he's a Muslim. His parents are Muslim. And I said, really? So I took Gilbert and I said, come on, I want you to go with me. I want to talk to Yasin. So I went and found Yasin and I said, Yasin, you were praying before you ate lunch. Who are you praying to? Allah? He said, oh, no, I was praying to Jesus. And I said, do you believe that Jesus is God? He said, oh, yes, that's what I believe. And so it impressed upon me again the good education they're getting at the orphanages about Christian doctrine, biblical truth. I mean, here's the son of Muslims who is there. And you might say to yourself, well, why would they ever send their son there? Because that's where he's going to get a good education. That's why. But that he's learned about Christ. And is he saved? I don't know, but he's believing in Christ. Then we traveled down, yes.
What danger is put on the children's lives if they believe like that and then go back and
Well, that's a good question. It'll depend on how committed to Islam his parents are. I mean, not all Muslims are radicals. I mean, in terms of terrorists or believe in jihad. And in India in particular, where they try to get along with the Hindus and other religions, the Sikhs that are there, there's not too much violence. It's interesting to me, in India, the Hindu activists, nationalists will attack Christians, but never the Muslims, because the Muslims will fight back. That's a good question. Yasin might end up graduating, from the orphanage and going on and his parents will say, well, if that's your decision, okay. But they won't necessarily be happy about it. Okay, so then we went down to the other orphanage at Torbe House. I'm always amazed because we'll make a trip and I'll say to Brother Paul, you built a school. Well, where'd you get the money for that? Well, we have money, we take up offerings. And then there was this guy in the UK that I knew, and I asked him if he'd like to make a donation. He made a large donation, so we built the school. I said, oh. Paul is a very resourceful person. When we went down to Torbe House, this is their school. It's away from the dorm area over here. And at Torbe House, the government still allows boys and girls at this orphanage, mainly because of the reputation of Paul's father. He had done this for so many decades, they don't complain. And we got a very warm welcome, very warm welcome, weather-wise and otherwise. Now, Ladine, did you go to Torbe House? Okay, so Ladine might be remembering Torbe House. Abby got a nice, and the boys there, we had a great time with those boys. We gave them, just like we did with the boys up at Agape Home, a lot of these school supplies that the church at Orville had sent, and they wrote us such a nice thank you note in English that I took back to the Orville Grace Brethren Church as a thank you for what they had sent. So after we finished the conference there, and when we have the conference, not only do we teach, but we sit down with each church planner and we say, how is it going? What kind of obstacles are you facing? How are you overcoming those obstacles? Are you following the written plan? What do you need? I mean, in terms of continuing to reach out. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out that in their efforts at evangelism and reaching out, they've been coming into contact with other independent men who are just out here and there. One guy that was working with a tribal group, and they said, "Oh, well, that's great. You're a believer? Yeah. Who are you?" "Well, we're a part of CGBCI, and this is who we are, and this is what we believe." "Oh, I'd never heard that before. Tell me more about that." And so that's why we've had new men come to our conferences, just to find out who are these people anyhow. And they sound like they're like us. And so they'll come and we'll meet them and get to visit them and present them with some of the same truths as far as our statement of faith, and have them study that. So it's been interesting how things little by little have been expanding. But after we finished meeting with them and visiting the orphanages, then for the first time, we were down here in Tamil Nadu at Coimbatore. We went up to Visakhapatnam, this city right here on the coast, mainly because the men in Orissa, it was formerly called Orissa, it's now called Odisha. They're largely in this area here. There's 3 different provinces where they're at. And it's a lot easier for them to come over here and meet us. It's very, very risky to go into this area. I wanted to go up here to this area to see them. And Brother Paul said, "No, you're not going." And I said, "Well, and why not?" He said, "Because the last white person that went up there was murdered." I said, "Well, that's a pretty good reason." maybe we'll find another way to do this. And so that's why we ended up meeting here with the men. This particular conference this year that we had, it was the first time that I had ever met their families. His conferences we had before, it was just the men who came because of 36-hour train ride. They weren't going to take their families. So it was such a blessing to meet them and their families at this conference that we had. I think it was the 19th and 20th, or maybe it was 18th and 19th, I'm not sure. And I was just so thankful. This building where we met, this is the roof where we took the pictures, but the room we met in, praise God from whom all blessings flow, it was air conditioned. Because it was 113 degrees there and about 90% humidity, and one night, just dark, eating supper. I mean, I was just sweating sitting there. I looked up at the street light and I could see the moisture in the air. It was just that humid. I said to Brother Paul, "Can we have this at another time of the year other than May?" And we're working on that. But we had a really good time at the conference with them. Brother Paul said that there's 3 different groups from 3 different areas that come together, and he said, "Okay, it's your turn to lead singing. This time it's your turn to lead." So they each took turns leading the singing. it's interesting to me how different they are from the people in the South. They're so much more lively. They ask more questions. It was a good time together. In fact, as I was teaching, we were talking about the family and disciplining children. And Brother Pratap, we'll probably have to run the pictures forward to get his picture here. I'll go back later. This is Brother Pratap. Many of you met Pastor Keith. That's the Pastor Keith of India. He is very outspoken and asks a lot of questions. And when we were talking about this, I want to tell you this story. He said to me, well, I really don't think that a good thrashing is all that bad for a child, something like that. And I said, well, what do you think is more effective, a loving response or just thrashing them? And he was thinking, and Brother Paul got up and came to the podium and told a story. I doubt if I'll ever forget this. He told all of them there, he said, you know, when I was growing up, I was a pretty rebellious kid. And one time my mother told me, you know, never go over there to that lake, you know, you stay away from there. He said, but I didn't pay any attention to her. And I went over there and messed around with my friends. I was gone for 2 hours. She couldn't find me, wondered where I was at. And I finally got home and she gave me the spanking of my life. She tied me to the chair and spanked me. And he said, and my heart was just as hard as it had ever been before. Later on in life, after I was going to college, I came home one day and I was there at home and I was doing things around the house and I noticed that I couldn't find my mom. And I cracked open the door and looked, and there she was on her knees by her bed, pouring out her heart to God for me. He said, it broke my heart. It was the turning point in my life where I said, Lord, I need you, change me. And he said, the rest is history. But it was a great example that I thought he gave to them, and what a testimony as to what prayer and the love of God can do. All right, let me back up a little bit. So these are pictures of the various team leaders. Okay, we looked at the video. So Brother Nehemiah, that arrow is pointing to him there. This is his wife, Hemangini. She just had surgery, but she's doing well. And one of his boys is here, and this is his other son. But he's the team leader of this group. They have, I think, between 6 and 7 churches in the area where he is, with about 70 who attend on Sunday. 60 of them are trying to immerse members. This is Brother Joseph. You'll see him again because he just baptized some people recently. And Manaranjan, one of the guys that works with him, he just got married. This is his wife and Brother David. And I think this is his little girl down here. And right offhand, I can't remember the other guy's name, Suresh, I think. And Joseph's wife is here with their child. So he's the team leader there in Umerkot in the state of Orissa or Odisha. And Nehemiah and his family. And then in the area of Golamunda, Peter Sipka, a couple years ago, he got married, his wife and their child, and then his brother is Pratap here. It's interesting to me, even though he's older, he wanted Peter to be the team leader because he is more skilled theologically. So he wanted him to be the team leader. And Brother Nehemiah is a graduate of a seminary there in India. He studied a 5-year program. He studied Hebrew and Greek. About a week ago, Dr. Whitcomb called me and asked me if I knew a missionary who had started that seminary but I don't know that particular missionary, but I explained to him that Nehemiah had graduated from that seminary and is working with us now. Okay, so this is a view of the Bay of Bengal from Vishakhapatnam, where we were staying. That was a pretty nice day that day, probably only 95 on that particular day. But then recently, Brother Joseph sent me these pictures of a young couple that he had been witnessing to for weeks, sharing the gospel with them, and baptized the wife, and then also the husband. And as I mentioned, just recently, he had baptized a couple, a mother and her daughter, and asked us to pray for her husband, whose name is John. And when we were in India, Nancy had a good time at the Taj Mahal because this little chipmunk went right up on her hand to eat that food. And then the three musketeers who went with us, they got tired as we were waiting to come back. I asked Peter, when we sit down with the different men, ask them how the ministry is going, what's happening, the ups and downs, the difficulties, the obstacles that they face. I said to Peter Sipka, I said, how do you, in light of these anti-conversion laws, how do you evangelize? And he said, well, we go into a town and we pass out tracts. But we don't just pass them out. We'll hand a tract to somebody. My name's Peter Sipka, and we'd like you to have this. And if they take it and they start to read it, he said, well, just stand there and wait. And if they keep reading it, they'll say, do you understand what you're reading? I read that somewhere. Was that Acts 8? And they'll say, well, no, I'm not sure. Well, you mind if I explain it? Yeah, go ahead. And so he said, then we'll get to share the gospel with them. And if a person is interested, they keep responding. We keep working with them and sharing with them. Now, while we were at the conference there in Vishakhapatnam, I'll answer your question now about Punjab. I wonder, do I have to go all the way back, or can I come back to this, the map at the beginning? Okay. So we were here at Vishakhapatnam. There were a couple men from Punjab here. Pakistan is right here. It's on the border of Pakistan. And they traveled all the way down to meet with us here at Vishakhapatnam. I don't remember how far exactly, maybe somewhere between 12 and 20-hour train ride to get there. Because they had heard about us, they wanted to meet with us. There were two of them. One guy had been a Sikh, but came to know the Lord. And then this younger man who was discipling him found as Pentecostal. So we had a lengthy discussion about Pentecostalism and charismatic signs. And our final admonition to them was, please take the statement of faith, go back home, study it, contact us with questions that you have. We'll answer those questions. And if you can come to a place where you would believe these doctrines, we could form a partnership. So that's where we're at right now. Supposedly they're studying the statement of faith and we're interacting with them. But it was impressive that they came all the way down to meet with us there. Any other questions that you have? Or comments or complaints? Brother Dave is headed that way with the mic.
These people who profess Christ and go out amongst their own people, like Paul, for example, Paul Rajan, what does his life, or how does that endanger him? Because they know who he is, they know his testimony of his character. So what kind of dangers does he face on a daily basis of just living his life before them, and they got to know what he's doing?
Yeah. Well, this area of India, right down in here, is probably the most lenient area. Most of the Christians are in this area. And so the government isn't quite as aggressive in terms of opposing the Christians in that area. In fact, I mentioned Joel Mathai, who was at Grace Seminary about it's been less than a year, I think. He moved back to India. He is in the city of Bangalore, which I think is here in Andhra Pradesh, right about here somewhere, training church planners now. But if you can get his newsletter, I get his newsletter, and people say to me, oh, have you read Joel's newsletter? Uh-huh. Did you know that was happening? Yes. Oh, because Paul knows. I mean, he's right there, so he knows too. But Paul does face, he's faced opposition when the people that he works with, he's the president of the mechanical engineering department of this school. Sometimes he'll ask for time off and he'll go to like our conference. And when they find out, they go to the owner and they say, you know, he ought to be fired because he's a Christian. And even though the owner is a Hindu, he doesn't care what he is as long as he does his job and does it well. And so there's this, you know, he faces some difficulties like that, but God has watched over and protected him. Now, he did say to me when we were there in May, he said, my department, the department that I lead, enrollment has been down for a couple years. The school has decided they're going to terminate various sections of the school to try to save money, downsize. So they're eliminating my department, my position. So I will, at the end of December, I'll be done. I said, then what? He goes, you know, that's a good question. That's a prayer request. He said, do I go into full-time ministry or do I find another job and keep working? Then he sent me an email recently and he said, well, I was just told that October 31st is my last day. It won't be December 31st, it's going to be October 31st. He said, so the request is a little more urgent now, that please pray and ask God what he would have me to do. He said, I'm not opposed to full-time ministry. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out, but I'm open to that. So it's a prayer request.
When you were in the bush country and you were walking up the path and the gentleman made the statement to you that there's tigers around here.
Oh, yeah.
Do they go prepared to defend themselves against wild animals?
They have guns.
Okay.
They'll take guns with them. Is your hand up? Or they want to make sure, Dave, that you get a good workout from that side to this side.
So work on another one, Jenny. I have a question about Odessa. It seemed like when Ladine went with you, it was too dangerous to go up there because of persecution and someone had been arrested, yet you were able to travel.
An Australian missionary had been murdered.
Okay. So have things quieted down up there for our sisters and brothers?
No. Voice of the Martyrs a few years ago was right on the front page of their publication that Kandhamal, which is in Orissa, not very far from where the guys are, is probably the most persecuted place on earth right now, even more so than some Arab places. It kind of comes and goes, you know, in waves. They had killed people, they had burned some of the church buildings, and then they backed off for a while. Brother Nehemiah told me, I asked him about that, and he said, well, they killed my uncle. He went into that area and they took a bicycle tire and shoved it down on him to hold his arms in with the spokes, and then poured gas on him and burned him. And they came to me and said, the same thing's going to happen to you if you keep preaching. And he said, I just said to them, well, you can do whatever you want to me, but if you kill me, the word's going to go out into the villages and around, and maybe even farther than that, maybe even over to the United States. I have friends there. And they will tell others and they will pray. God will vindicate us. And they let him alone. So it's amazing. You know, it's kind of like Acts 12. Headed, but Peter is released. I have not been able to fathom the sovereignty of God in all this, but some of those things happen.
You have mentioned a number of church planters. Are there any men who are just pastors that we do not support? Because eventually...
Well, we've had lengthy discussions about that.
Yes.
I've said to them, if you are going to plant a church and just pastor it, we're only interested as a mission to plant churches. And so all of those men said, well, what do we do with the churches that we've planted? I said, well, that's up to you. You should be training other men, churches, and there's nothing that says you can't help, but you also need to be involved in planning other churches if we're going to work with you as far as financial support goes. So that has been what they've decided to do, that they will train other men, that they'll be involved with that church, but they'll also reach out. And they typically do this together. You know, that's the team approach has been very good in terms of working together to reach out into another area, to evangelize and see a Bible study started.
I was curious because we have these men that are church planters, but then if they are to continue receiving support, they have to go plant some other church.
Right.
And do they have men that are taking the place? They have to train them.
Yes. I mean, just like Joseph, this man that he just baptized, he'll begin discipling him, but it's going to take time.
Do they have fractoriums over there?
Well, yes and no. We have gone over and over and over this with them in terms of how it needs to be done. And to some degree, they've followed those instructions. But they've said to me at different times, sometimes it's just not possible to get together and make this happen. I said, well, it has to happen. Whether you can get together and do it or whether you're just doing it in your area, but it has to happen. And like in Gola Munda, Peter said to me, yes, we get together twice a month for a number of days and go over the courses together. And I said, okay, as long as you're doing it, however you decide you're going to do it. And then they'll pick a topic like when we go to visit, you know, we'd like further instruction about this. In the past, it was eschatology. It was the book of Revelation. This time it was the family. And so it's also an opportunity for them, particularly as teachers, to ask questions. Ready for my question?
So you're about 30 churches there now.
Yeah. I didn't see anybody shake their head yes. Brother Rob said, yep, he's ready for my question. How many of you are hungry? Not too many, so we could go on another hour, Pastor Russ.
How many are hungry now? All right, so another hour was sufficient threat. Okay, we're going to dismiss. Our thanks to Brother Ike.